Colonel Slingsby and I in the evening to the coffee house in Cornhill. The first time that ever I was there, and I found much pleasure in it, through the diversity of company and discourse. Hello, and welcome to this special edition of TimeTable London, a podcast for lovers of London, by lovers of London. I'm coming to you from the site of the coffee house in Cornhill that Samuel Pepys mentions in his diary for Monday, 10 December, 1660. I'm Tim MacDonald of Cradle of English, and I'm joined today, and as ever, by my regular co-host, archivist Dr. Jeff Browell of King's College London. With our executive producer, Christopher Wynne, and today's very special guest, we happy for are, like Pepys, finding much pleasure in the diversity of company and discourse in the Jamaica Winehouse. Today's spectacularly cozy tavern stands on the site of London's very first coffee house, opened here in St. Michael's Alley, just off Cornhill, in 1652. And this coffee link is appropriate in more ways than one today, with several global connections, set up by a Greek to promote a Turkish product and helping to fuel an explosion of trade and innovation in London, which, happily, our guest today has described as the world's coffee house. Jeff, would you like to do the honours?
Yes, well, welcome today, Michael. You were the 695th Lord Mayor of London.
Indeed.
We're now on to 696.
Yay.
And so, right, I was going to say, you have many, many accomplishments, which we can talk throughout this session on and about. But I'm going to ask you straight up. In its time, London competed with Antwerp, Amsterdam, and then it sort of pulled out in front. Why? Why was London successful? How does it continue to be successful as a place of commerce and trade?
Well, we keep reinterpreting the history of London as we learn more, to be honest. I basically don't believe London was a particularly important financial centre until Sir Thomas Gresham. Now, Sir Thomas Gresham built the Royal Exchange just over the way, about sort of 60 yards from here, I think. In 1560, roughly 1563, I believe it was opened. There are actually some disputes about when it opened, when we still have the two giant golden grasshoppers on the roof. But what was it? Well, the Royal Exchange is a little hard to understand today, but in the days pre-internet, how did you find who you wanted to invest with? You kind of walked up and down the streets, didn't you? And you kind of went, oh, hi, I've got a...
You want some money?
Yeah, you want some money? Because I want to invest. And they used to rope off Cornhill. I think they put chains at both ends of it. And people would trudge up and down in the mud. Meanwhile, over on the continent, the Dutch had come up with something far better. In Ghent, from memory, an Italian family by the name of Borsa, and this will become important in a minute, Borsa meaning bag in Italian, had come up with the idea of letting merchants assemble on sort of first Tuesday, one night a week, and do that same kind of trading. I'm sending a caravan over into Italy. Would you like to co-fund it with me? I want a boat to go across the Baltic and get amber. And this was how they were setting it up. It became a permanent facility. Again, it was copied by many other cities of the Low Countries. It wasn't really Belgium and the Netherlands then. It was just the Low Countries. And the one in Antwerp was absolutely enormous. It was a marvel. Merchants all over Northern Europe, thought this was the best thing of all. A place where merchants could stay dry and warm and conduct their trade. Now, Thomas Gresham was a mercer here in London, and the mercers were even then amongst the wealthiest of the livery companies. They were trading typically silks into London and bulk wools out and many other fabrics. Gresham himself had a house in Antwerp at 42 Neustraat, and he was, in my opinion, famous for really three things. The first is he copied the Royal Exchange and built one here in conjunction with the City of London. So the City of London Corporation and the mercers did this as a joint venture. The second thing he did was he created the first shopping mall. The first floor of the Royal Exchange was a shopping mall, and we have Pepys talking about wandering around trying to find things for the missus on the top of the Royal Exchange. And the third thing, which we only found out about when we commissioned a book by John Guy, Dr. John Guy of Tudor historian fame, was it's highly likely he brought double-entry bookkeeping from the Low Countries to London. So prior to this, London was just an outback town where, Norfolk sheep and wool were sort of sent to the continent. Gresham himself was, if not enamored of the Low Countries, certainly very familiar. He made 128 voyages in his lifetime to Antwerp. And if you think about the amount of hard work that was in those days, horseback to the coast, sitting on the coast trying to cross, getting over in terrible weather in small boats. So anyway, to get back to your question, though, what made London there? So here we are, as late as 1565, in a city that is just aping the continent. Now, we've learned 4 things matter over the last umpteen centuries. The city's been in existence since roughly about 640 AD. I like to call it the world's oldest continuous democratic workers and residents cooperative. One is the importance of defense and security. Nobody brings money to a war zone. Secondly, we're very concerned about the rule of law, treating all comers fairly in the widest sense. In fact, our motto is meum dictum pactum, my word is my bond. That's the informal motto of the city. The formal motto is Domine dirige nos, Lord guide us. The third thing is access to talent and skills, and the fourth thing is open and free trade. So we don't tend to think about defense and security, but remember, London was shut effectively as a financial center during World War II. People were not going to bring money here during the Blitz. And the Dutch, somewhat foolishly, pick an enormous fight in the middle of the 16th century with the Spanish. And I believe that was fundamental in making people decide that they'd really rather do their work here, safe and free from
So it was
strife.
a safe space.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and a trusted space, and a space with a lot of talent and skills, and a place that was committed to open and fair trade.
The Dutch, of course, were fantastic engineers, weren't they? And they were renowned in the early modern times for being amazing engineers constructing the dikes and so on, and they came to East Anglia and to the fens and they drained them, and in military engineering as well. So do you think that their love of the mathematical had a part to play, and perhaps people in London inherited that they were seeing the world in a slightly different way that was perhaps more amenable to a world of finance?
Well, it's certainly the case that the Dutch influence over London is long and deep and often forgotten. A point I like to make is that for 400 years, from the time of, John, up until the end of Queen Elizabeth's reign, we had, again, just a few tens of yards from here, we had Cannon Street Station today, but then it was known as the Stahlhof, the steel yard. And this was a zone where only Hanseatic merchants could trade and only Hanseatic merchants could enter.
Yeah.
Think about it. You're a citizen of London. You're walking along the river, and then they're saying, "Oi, you, out of here!" And in fact, they had a shibboleth, which was "Käse und Brot," cheese and bread, which is how they say it. And if you couldn't say that in a low German accent, you weren't allowed in. Holbein, of course, comes and paints these merchants. It's what brought Holbein to London, was these rich merchants kind of bored, wanting to. Now, London was not a Hanseatic city. London was what was called a contour, a bit like Bergen. It was a warehouse zone. Now, the Hanseatic League really forms out of Lübeck, Bremen, and Hamburg in the 12th century, and is quite dominant up until the early 15th century. I think its last formal doings were in the 17th century. But believe it or not, as late as 1853, from memory, the land that forms Cannon Street Station was sold to the railway company by the joint cities of Hamburg, Lübeck, and Bremen. So a long-winded answer, but our relations with the Dutch are very, very deep and long. A lot of people think the Hanseatic League is German. It was actually Low German, which was in those days that entire area. And in some of the archives in Lübeck, you can read of them making fun of people who didn't speak Low German, and it comprised actually quite a few inland cities. Cologne, for example, was a Hanseatic city. So we start really there with a much more integrated Northern European community. We can go all the way forward, to Peter the Great and to Pepys himself, basically hiring the Dutch to teach the English how to build proper ships. This is after 1660. So it's been a very long relationship, and I think probably the biggest thing that we forget about when you talk about mathematics is the importance of the various Royal Society elements. So the Royal Society, of course, grows out of Sir Thomas Gresham's Royal Exchange, because the Royal Exchange, when he passes away in 1579, his will has really says that the biggest thing is to set up Gresham College, which opens in 1597 after 17 years of fights with the with the widow who wanted to keep all the money for herself and her two sons who weren't his progeny. So in 1597, Gresham College opens, and in November 1660, in Sir Christopher Wren and Robert Hooke's presence, the Royal Society begins. And it starts there, and of course the relations with the Dutch, Leeuwenhoek and all, were again very, very deep and strong. And a little bit later we of course have the enormous fights between Leibniz and Newton over who originated the calculus. And so it's all quite a fascinating period of great interaction between Northern Europe and London intellectually.
This is one of our favourite meeting places is, of course, the Devereux.
I was just going to say.
Which was the Grecian coffee house was, and that's where Newton dissected a dolphin, famously.
That's
among
right.
Many other.
We won't get into the dolphin, as per an earlier podcast, but it's interesting how the different layerings of history bring us back on a loop to, as you said, to that dolphin, and indeed that particular pub, which was itself a coffee house before, wasn't it? The Devereux before was the Grecian, and there is the Newton room at the back. In fact, we have a photograph, we with our timetable hat on. We've got a photograph of, I'm not sure if you were there, Chris, but you were there, Michael, after one of our workshops at King's.
That's right.
We had a good round of drinks and talking about the beginnings of the Royal Society, and I suspected that there might have been a bit of about the Royal Society having been torn away from Gresham and set up in Crane Court. Maybe there was a sense of it going down market at that point, eh?
Well, certainly very far west, which we in the city don't appreciate.
It won't catch on there, will it?
No, but it went even further west to Carlton Terrace, obviously. But of course, you're absolutely correct. Some people believe that Newton took the Royal Society out of the city deliberately because it was just after Hooke passed away that move occurred, that he just didn't want anything to do with Hooke. You'll remember there's that great thing that Principia Mathematica opens with, if I see further than others, it's because I stand on the shoulders of giants.
And Robert
Hooke was very small and hunchbacked, supposedly. So in other words, I didn't depend on you. Although, historians today believe that Hooke had quite a bit of indirect influence on it, and in fact may have, frankly, kind of had his own version of infinitesimals. Of course, it's very important, I think, because we do have this English view of, Newton was the brightest man and all that. It is important to recognize that we really pretty much teach Leibniz's version of calculus to students, because Newton pretty much kind of goes along the lines of, you go this far and then there's sort of infinitesimals, and then I leave it to the interested genius to make the leap on integration from this equation to that, whereas the Leibniz approach of using limits is a little bit more comprehensible to students. So we actually teach Leibniz's calculus.
I think is important is the fact that religion is still very important within the city in its own way, and religion played such an important role in the founding of the Royal Society. Because it's a little known fact that some of the early, even before the Royal Society was founded, there were a group of individuals who used to travel around the country, and they were providence hunters. So their role was to seek out and disprove false examples of miracles that were happening. And they did that with the intention of strengthening the established church and a belief in religion, Christian religion. But inadvertently, they discovered modern scientific methodology.
And you're stretching me a bit, but from memory, there was also something called the Invisible College, which was speaking about the relations between the city and particularly Wadham in Oxford, although a couple of other Cambridge colleges. Because, of course, when Gresham College is founded, it is the first institution of higher learning outside of Oxbridge. It was a monopoly, and it was enforced to some degree because the bishops who were in the House of Lords really didn't like the idea of anything happening. And Gresham College supposedly made some remonstrations in 1820 when both King's and UCL were being formed, to point out that actually this wasn't so revolutionary. They'd been around since 1597, because one of the objections was this has never happened before, and then it was no, we've been around for a couple of hundred years. So. But also when you get back to the coffee houses, of course, the Garraway, which was so we're sitting right now in the Jamaica Inn, which was originally the Pasco de Rosa and allegedly the first coffee house in London in 1652, although I think there might have been a coffee house in Oxford in 1650.
There was one.
You got to admit that there was, yes.
Yeah.
No.
But Garraway's is just over in Change Alley, and that was Robert Hooke's favorite haunt. Yeah, so he used to, he would not, well, he drank everywhere, coffee and everything else, but he
because it was just a great fire that helped stimulate things in a way, because of all the disputes between landowners and people having to measure out their estates and work out, no, actually your boundary wall was a yard further to the west than you say it was, and all that kind of stuff. And of course that's what Hooke was involved in, and the others were involved in.
He was a surveyor, city surveyor. And
he made the monument, didn't he? Designed the monument, Hooke.
Therein lies a tale. Yeah, the monument. So I'm quite a fan of the monument. The City of London Corporation is responsible for it, and we don't have enough visitors for it. A few hundred go up a day, when easily we could have quite a few more. I think the families just get a little tired. By the time they've seen Tower Bridge and everything else, they've kind of done that bit. So last year we decided to recreate Hooke's and Wren's experiments. So if you think about the monument, it's quite weird. So it's situated in Pudding Lane, and we have the famous monument there, and then marking the site of the bakery where the fire started. We have Pie Lane, which is where the Fat Boy is opposite St. Bartholomew's then hospital. And it was because Londoners believed that the fire, well, they believed many things about the fire. It was instigated by Frenchmen, and one of them was lynched effectively. But the idea was they settled on gluttony, so it began at Pudding Lane and ended at Pie. So they erected this Fat Boy. But Hooke and Wren, a few years after they finished most of the rebuilding, proposed to the city fathers, i.e. we aldermen, that there ought to be a proper monument. Now, I just want you to think about it. When you go out there in Latin, it says 202 feet from this spot was the bakery oven that started the fire. Well, if you were trying to build a cheaper monument, wouldn't you just sort of move 202 feet over and you could get away with a plaque on the ground, right? Yes. So what did they do? So they basically suckered the city into this idea that they'd have this monument. Now, the monument is hollow through the middle. Many people don't know that. Absolutely hollow, circular staircase. But it's hollow all the way through the flaming pineapple at the top. So and in fact, that pineapple cranks open a bit like a James Bond film. Yes.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it's really quite a bit. And we're not 100% sure, but we think they wanted to do parallax of the stars. And this gets you into a bit of science here, but the idea is that you can see exactly how far things are going and calculate sidereal time versus real time. They never got it to work. And last year, I was delighted when I proposed that we had a series of experiments that the Worshipful Company of Scientific Instrument Makers, led by the previous master Professor Philip Thomas, recreated we had fiber optic in there, we had all sorts of things to see, could we measure it? What we concluded was that the vibrations, even then, from foot traffic were significant, but it turns out it was actually the wind. The wind moves the monument too much for Hooke or Wren to have ever had successful experiments, given the accuracy they needed to measure the parallax.
But by hook or by crook, they managed to get the results that they need.
It's going to be a long afternoon.
Because there's a little laboratory, isn't there, underneath?
There is, just beneath the ticket counter, and I've been down in that.
It's not easy
pretty
to
awkward.
get into, is it?
But supposedly they lay there on their backs and stared straight up.
Well, somebody told me the other day something extraordinary, and that is that the technology with telescopes is such now that actually you can use telescopes in the middle of built-up areas because somehow it can filter out not if it's completely cloudy, of course, it has to be a clear sky, but somehow it can filter out all the interference. And so it's admittedly not as good as if you were on the top of the Canary Islands, but which is where many of these places are based. Because King's has one on the top on its roof. And I said, what use is a telescope now? And they said, well, for about 80 or 90 or 100 years, it was completely useless. But now we can actually use it with the right equipment.
This is terrible. These King's astronomers are letting the sign down. It should be only the Canary Islands, or only in Chile, or only out in Tahiti. If people find out science can be done at home, all those travel budgets are going to heck and back.
So, in the case of your career, why the City of London? Why not Manhattan or Singapore or Tokyo or any other business centres? Why London?
Oh. Well, the first thing is, if you're really interested in what I'd call international wholesale finance, kind of the way the real world really works underneath, there are arguably only 5 centres of note. Historically, it would be London and Hong Kong. And then you can add to that, in the last 70 years, Singapore. And then you can add to that, in the last 30 years, Dubai and Abu Dhabi. So Paris, Frankfurt, even New York are not places that people go to unless they have a domestic component. So nobody goes to New York to do, say, a Malaysian, French, Brazilian pharmaceutical deal. You don't know where you stand. You don't have, remember I said, first was defense and security, second was rule of law. So there'll be some arcane thing under New York state law that you have to notify the state apothecary on alternate Thursdays, or you wind up in an orange jumpsuit or something. You just don't know where you stand on it. But in these 5 centers that I named, you can go and as adults agree a contract, and if you fall out in some way, the judge will interpret that contract according to the intentions of the parties. He or she will be looking at what did you intend to do, and look at that accordingly. So when it comes to commercial law, the common law approach is the one that's favored by most business people. As proof of that, over 40% of international contracts are written specifying London as the jurisdiction for arbitration, mediation, conciliation, etc.
So it wouldn't be by accident that the 5 cities that you mentioned were all cities in which everybody was perfectly comfortable speaking English, whereas in Paris, maybe not so much.
Well, it's more, I think, the civil code, to be frank. Hong Kong and Singapore get the civil code by virtue of being English colonies. Abu Dhabi and Dubai adopted common law. So Dubai was first, and a number of us in the city, when they were asking how can we build a financial center, we said the biggest thing about having a financial center is treating all comers fairly, and common law is the best way to do that. So they adopted a zone in Dubai, DIFC, Dubai International Financial Center, that does that. And the same thing happened in Abu Dhabi a little bit later, about 20 years ago. And I'm currently advising other cities around the world, and I say, if you want to do it, that is frankly what you have to do. The vast preponderance of global trade and global finance are done under common law. And so places like Frankfurt, where you've got a civil code that's complex, you're trying to just go in there. You're not going to do a deal that doesn't involve a German company or German funding or something. Same in Paris, same in America. So it's notice even in America you've got 50 states with their own bar.
Yeah.
And even there's a lot of jurisdiction shopping with people saying this will be under the state of New York or state of Delaware or state of California. And many other jurisdictions are just overlooked. So there's a lot of jurisdiction shopping. And where do I want, when this agreement, hopefully never, but if it does have a problem, where are we going to have it settled? And you want it to be in a jurisdiction which is amenable to what you call grown-ups making an adult decision together and wanting to see that through.
Where do you see this common law amenability sorting itself out over the immediate future, the coming years, in the face of the threat of rule of law that we hear so much about, with populism and tariffs and all the noise in the world now about jurisdictions and so on? Is it going to matter as much in 20 years as it does now, do you think, common law?
I think it will matter as much in 20 years. If we're going to have international trade, most definitely. You could see a fear that one jurisdiction might declare that common law is not suitable within our boundaries or something. But I might point you to maybe three things. One is we in the city are much more worried than people understand when we see threats to the British judiciary. Remember that the City of London, run the central criminal courts at the Old Bailey. I used to joke, hi Elizabeth, my wife, we lived in the Old Bailey for 2 years during COVID, and I used to joke, hey, honey, I'm home. 18 courts, 74 jail cells, 2 cabinets of medieval torture equipment, and no television. What do you want to do tonight? So it's quite an interesting time. But the city cares even about the criminal side, but we care at least as much or more about the civil side. And we were not pleased at some of the attacks during Brexit on the judiciary. The Brexit decision is a Brexit decision, but we did have a prime minister basically insulting the judiciary and prorogating Parliament and a number of other things. That causes us concern, as do certain of the things going on in the current U.S. administration, where they're challenging the courts quite vigorously. So that I just hold that out to you, that we care. The second thing I point out is we just had the bill that was passed a week ago Saturday in a sort of an emergency session of Parliament, the first one for many, many years. And again, this past weekend, I can assure you that many people that I know were reading that bill carefully to see, did that in some way violate the concept of rule of law? Were the limitations on what was being proposed appropriate, in particular property rights? And we worry about things like particularly windfall taxes or super profit taxes, because these are things where it was your property, but now that you've made what we consider to be too much money, we're going to seize it back from you. That's quite frightening, because remember, the state's not there to you lost too much. Here's a bit of cash to keep you going. It doesn't really trip off politicians' lips very often. So we are very, very, very concerned about the rule of law. And the final thing, which I'm going to take you to the other side of the planet. Last year, I was in China, traveling as the Lord Mayor. So we do over 100 days abroad. I did 25 countries. But I was sitting there with Vice President Han of China, and his opening remarks were praising the fact that Hong Kong is China's window on the world and the world's window on China, and that we should recognize that they have kept Hong Kong as a common law center where you can contract throughout China using common law. So even the Chinese recognize how important it is. This is from the Vice President himself on national television. So I don't think there's anything more conclusive than common law is much more important than we understand. And whilst none of us are lawyers, I don't believe, or no. Nevertheless, as business people, it is very, very clear that common law is a much more flexible structure. It's flexible because it's evolutionary. It's based on cases, and those cases accrete over time. And so you can open up a new area. These days, at the moment, digital assets are very trendy, but the law in that area is evolving, and it can evolve here. Whereas in other nations, people have to wait until some politician puts forward the digital asset bill. In fact, Sir Geoffrey Voss, who's the master of the rolls, did a study, I think 2.5, 3 years ago, when people were saying, we need a digital asset bill, and he wrote a fairly lengthy and well-reasoned paper saying, no, we don't. It's all coverable under common law. There are things that we could do that would make it easier. For example, removing some medieval signature requirements and things from certain contracts, but other than that, you can do anything you want under common law. And in fact, the Electronic Trade Document Act, which was passed from memory in 2023, is a very, very lengthy document of, I think, 5 pages, 7 if you count the cover and the table of contents. it's very, very short because there's very little required
Yeah.
to say, and all it does is just remove a few oddities.
Hi, this is Tam McDonald, your host. If you're enjoying TimeTable London, then please tell your friends about us by sending them a link to the show, giving us a mention on social media, or even by, or especially by, chatting about us in the pub. TimeTable London, for everything you love about the world's greatest city.
So, do you think that the office of Lord Mayor is still relevant?
Well, if you go back to, this being the world's oldest democratic workers and residents cooperative, we represent 678,000 people who work in the square mile. And why do we know that? Because they have the vote, so we're pretty careful of that. And we have 8,000 residents. I believe it's relevant because we try and make it relevant. And our job is really threefold. One is to create prosperity. So a lot of Lord Mayor's outreach is to bring people in, to do deals, if you like. I could play a kind of a silly politician's game, which is just when very early on in my term, in November 23, the president of South Korea came over, and in theory we signed 23 billion pounds worth of deals at Mansion House. One can take these with a grain of salt, to be absolutely honest. But there were lots and lots of things that happened during the year which need somebody to connect them. And anybody can do it, and I happen to have had the job for a year, and my successor, Alistair, is doing a super job, and my predecessor, Nick. Just by pushing the Lord Mayor around, these things happen. So the role is useful. Having created prosperity, the second thing is to work hard on improving the built environment. I can give you a couple of examples here. One is that a chap by the name of Michael Wellbank, who sadly passed away, I've sort of inherited Michael's mission. Michael was a developer turned planning and transportation. He became chairman of planning and transportation at the corporation. And he promulgated a concept which I really believe in called groundage. Now, my observations, again, doing that research at Harvard years ago, is that skyscrapers tend to kill all the life underneath them. It's a bit like a large tree in a jungle. Everything underneath the canopy of the tree, just doesn't get enough light. And I think there's another thing. I think we as apes, which is what human beings are very nervous next to big cliffs. Things fall off of cliffs, and we know that instinctively. Do not stand next to the cliff. Not a good place to stand. Right? So what are we doing? We're building cliffs, and we feel uncomfortable. So you watch skyscrapers carefully, and you'll see nobody just kind of hangs out at the base of the skyscraper. They don't do it. They bad vibes, whatever they call it, but we don't do that. So Michael created this idea that we in the city should be kind of the Carlsberg of planning authorities. If you remember the old Carlsberg ads, where if Carlsberg ran an airline, this is how it would be. And so people come into the city and, I want to build a 50-story building. That's great. You thought about 55. What? This is fantastic. I love this place. Oh, just one tiny little thing, if you don't mind. What's that? Could we have large chunks of the ground floor for people to go through? Some people call it these days permeability, but, it's the idea that you can flaneur underneath London. And the first big building to do it was the Bloomberg Centre. If you look at Bloomberg, for those of you who remember, I think it's just 9 years ago it opened. But the Bloomberg Centre was Walbrook, and that was just this enormous block right there in the middle of the city that you just couldn't get around or go through. And now it's a fantastic pedestrian area with shops and permeability. We then have 22 Bishopsgate, 100 Bishopsgate, 8 Bishopsgate. So you're starting to see, planning takes a long time. You're starting to see all these buildings where you can walk through. And it's been a deliberate program by the city, and I've spoken in Common Council about it. We've got some new councillors coming in. I'll be speaking again. I just want to keep reminding people we want that permeability, which brings back the pub and the coffee shop type of culture.
And that should be about getting people back into London, the square mile. Tourists, visitors, occasional people dropping off. they want to be able to walk through. At the moment, or until recently, it's been quite formidable. They go so far in the West End and they don't go any further east necessarily, unless they're going to the Tower of London.
One of the things you do as Lord Mayor is you live at Mansion House, and Elizabeth and I would come out on a Saturday or Sunday morning and be quite pleasantly surprised at the number of people. What people forget is that a number of changes have happened. They accrete over time, and you've almost got to remind people, go back, not 6 months ago or COVID, but we have a ring of hotels around the city that we didn't have 20 years ago. And those are the people we were seeing on Saturday and Sunday mornings, because they're the business people / tourists who got up and go, well, I just want to go for a bit of a walk, and then they start to see it. We have many more facilities. The Guildhall Art Gallery is better marketed, Bank of England Museum, the Mithraeum. There's a lot more to see. There's also shopping. So there's a lot more happening. More could happen.
Did the Millennium Bridge help?
Definitely.
That made it much more accessible.
Definitely. So all these connections are making a big difference.
Yeah.
And
so do you think London will thrive into the future?
as long as we want it to, yes. There's no reason it shouldn't. We've got so many great facilities, whether it's the history. Very few cities are actually as old as we are. No. Now, I started school in Rome, and there's a lot of Roman stuff around, but most people don't remember. But Rome, here's the trivia question I like to ask historians. In the time of Sir Thomas Gresham, what was the largest city in Europe, and how large was it?
Well,
Rome?
I would say Istanbul. Istanbul.
Does that get to be Europe?
If it's the European bit. Well, it depends on how one defines.
That's fair enough. You might have beat me here, but in Northern Europe, then he says, quickly revising his terms, 100,000, and it was Antwerp.
I was going to say.
Oh, of course.
And London only had 30,000. But interestingly, in the 16th century, Rome only had 30,000. Rome had historians.
London was the first million city, is that right?
Oh yes. Well, this gets me on to another topic dear to my heart, which is the Thames and Thames sailing barges, which Jeff knows. Yes, that was a foolish remark to make in front of Michael. Yeah, as late as 1903, when the House of Lords did a study on the vulnerabilities of London, over 75%, everything Londoners ate, wore, and drank was transported then by the Thames. So one of the
it all went past Greenwich, didn't it?
Well, the Thames is tidal, frankly, all the way up to Oxford and a bit. But in truth, I mean, these days it ends at Teddington, but it's very tidal. And that gives you, and it's important because most people don't realize that tidal rivers are rarer than you think. Most rivers are tidal at the mouth, but the extent of the Thames is amazing. So the entire Mediterranean is a lake. There's no tide. It goes up and down a few inches a day. So there's no tide there. What does that mean? That means you can be sitting in Ostia off of Rome, and if the wind isn't moving in the right direction, and you're there with a 200-ton ship, which would be a typical trading vessel of the 17th century, and no wind,
you're stuck.
You're stuck. And you can sit there for weeks, unless you have oars, in which case then you can do it, but it's grunt. Whereas we have in the Thames, the Thames itself faces sort of in one direction towards the southwest. Yeah. So the prevailing winds from the southwest, which blows you out and allows you to turn up to Suffolk and Essex or turn towards Kent. But when you're coming back up into London, you don't need any wind whatsoever. Because
just come in with the tide.
Come in with the tide, drop your anchor, wait.
I never thought
go
of
up.
that.
So you can do 70 miles a day. And I once calculated it's like an 8,000 to 1 ratio of Thames sailing barges versus ox carts.
Versus what?
Ox carts. So your traditional way of travel overland would be an ox cart. An ox will do anywhere from 8 to 12 miles a day. If you do it for 12 miles a day constantly, you'll kill your ox quite soon. So you're really looking at 8 to 10 miles a day. Call it 10 for the sake of simple bits. Every ox cart needs a man to push it, and it carries 1 ton. A Thames sailing barge, my old barge, Lady Daphne, carried 220 tons. So you're doing 36 to 72 miles a day with 2 men.
Wow.
Right, by 200. Or you're doing a ton for 1, or 2 tons if you have 2 men. So you begin to get into the mechanics of it. The only other river of serious extent with a tidal flow is the Elbe. But, the Seine, I forget, 10 or 15 miles up the road. The Rhine, definitely not. It's just gushing. So you're looking at very, very hard. So London had sustainable transport. What it didn't have was a particularly good boat-building industry, which is why Pepys again becomes important.
So it didn't have what?
A particularly good boat-building industry. Remember that Henry VIII, of course, father of the Navy and all that. Well, as I recall, a ship of the line named the Mary Rose, rolled over, sank, and killed virtually everybody on board. That kind of rockets around the capitals of Europe.
Yeah, I bet.
And Charles I, when he comes back from France in 1660, then gets whumped at Chatham, he and Pepys concoct this idea of rebuilding the Navy using Dutch designs and techniques. What's often overlooked by historians who tend to focus on, they do tend to focus on war and who's bonking whom and the royalty, but at the same time, the Dutch were building their typical barges here in England. And suddenly they woke up to the fact that the barges didn't need to fit the Dutch canals. So an English sailing barge is about 21 feet in breadth. There are Dutch barges that length, but they're restricted in some of the waters they can do. And it's this is roughly from about 1670 to 1750. The design then stabilizes in 1750. And from 1750 for 200 years, you could go on to any Thames sailing barge in the dark. There were something like roughly 10,000 built. Some people say only 3,000. You could go in the dark and find everything because it was all in the same.
Really?
It was identical. Now, the interesting correlation here is I'm trying to remember the numbers. When Elizabeth passes away in 1603, London is running at, I think, about 400,000 people, which is quite significantly up from 30,000, maybe 250, something like that. Then your listeners can look this up online, but basically London shoots up quite markedly and hits 1 million in 1800. Now, I then pick a particular date, which is like 1825. Why do I pick that? Because the first railway comes. And London's running at 2.25 million. So at the time of the first railway, London is feeding itself off of Thames sailing barges. And, of course, the English experience of railways was different than the continent. Railways were built to get people out of the city. The whole idea was to get them out because the city was getting too clogged up. So if you look at the prospectuses of the 1840s, you'll see that they emphasize getting the post out and getting you back to your country estate, because there was no freight. Nobody would really compete. In fact, the one piece of competition was the Limehouse Link, which was invested in quite heavily, because everybody said, "Oh, this is brilliant! We connect the canal system with the Thames, instant win." And of course, it went bust because you really couldn't compete with Thames sailing barges in terms of just sheer low-cost efficiency.
So would you class yourself as an enthusiastic flaneur? Do you like wandering around the streets of London?
Totally.
And anywhere else, in fact?
Anywhere else. Yeah, so
especially now that you've got some time on your hands.
Time. I walk in and out every day from home, so...
Do you walk?
I live 30 minutes from here, so we're not even. I live in Wapping. And I was once trying to calculate how many different ways I can get here, and I quit at about 117. Most of those are sort of, if I branch here and go that way, or branch here, it's not like wildly different routes, but boy, there's a lot of London to see. When friends come over, and I like good long distance walks, we frequently go from where we live in Wapping over Tower Bridge, and then we continue east along the river. So we pass the Brunel up a bit. We might stop at the Angel. We might stop at the Mayflower. May stop at certain other places to water, and then we take the ferry over to Canary Wharf and then walk back, where we really start to hit the Grapes, the Prospect of Whitby, Captain Kidd's, and the town of Ramsgate. Yeah, so no, that's one of my favorite walks. And I think I've only done it about 20 times. And of course, it's even better now because we have the Bermondsey Mile, or the Beermondsey Mile, if you've heard of this.
What's the Bermondsey Mile?
Well, let's start with beer. So one of the great walks is if you go across Tower Bridge and down to where the railway is, would take, if you went right, it would take you into London Bridge.
Oh, yeah.
But if you go left, there are about 30 micro-breweries.
Oh, really?
Stretching about 2 miles. Quite a concentration at that end, quite a concentration in the middle. But you can go all the way to Millwall, and there's one pub there. And I have maybe found time to make that walk a few times.
As we're sitting here in the Jamaica Wine House, with our esteemed guest, who's not only a clear world traveller, who's accomplished an awful lot, but also very plainly likes his beer. Michael, what is there special in your experience and in your mind now? What is there special about an English pub? And why do my North American friends complain that they can't replicate over there what we've got over here? Is it something that we big ourselves up too much about in London, that in fact it's not all that special and other people do have English pub equivalents? Or if we are special, what is it that makes us special?
Well, I think the basic thing is London pubs are special, but not too special.
Is too special a bad thing?
Yeah, well, I would go... Look, my wife and daughters would be stunned if we were going down any street somewhere within about 4 miles of here and we passed a pub I hadn't been in. They're always like, what? Daddy's not been in this pub? You know? Which shows you that I take my studies very seriously. I think more importantly is, since the dawn of time, mankind has wanted to get together. And there's an interesting approach to look at Europe as built, the mainland, as being built on coffee houses. Now, my wife is German, and we spend a lot of time in Germany, and the Wirtschaft culture is not quite the pub culture at all. But the coffee house culture is. People go into coffee house. I'll define that in a minute. The other notable exception, I lived in Ireland for a number of years, and honestly, Irish pubs throughout the island are fantastic. Whereas I think you could make a distinction between, as you were doing earlier, London pubs and country pubs, in a sense. And just before I answer the question clearly, I would point out that one of the things that's interesting about the city is its culture. So here, how would I look at the city? Well, we have 678,000 people drop onto 1.12 square miles. There's no other place on the planet that intense. Manhattan, 350,000 maybe over 6 square miles, that kind of thing. Tokyo, very, very intense, but nobody goes to one spot. They're all racing around everywhere. It's a very intense commuter zone. And therefore, by definition, with 8,000 residents, right, well under 2% of the people around here live here. So, funny enough, I happen to know a chap who lives just there, but that's rarity, the Rose family. What you're seeing is anybody you meet in a pub is not there buying a pint of milk. They're not walking the dog, right? They're there to work. And so I will go into pubs around here. I remember being in the ship year before last, and some young 25-year-old insurance broker, "Oi," as we're waiting for a beer, "Oi, what do you do for a living?" That's perfectly normal. You do that in Hertfordshire, and you've committed a bit of a faux pas, you see what I mean? So it's reflecting the culture. Another thing about the city is our intense punctuality. We were never really that much of originators on clocks, and there was a period when the English manufacturing of clocks was very, very sophisticated. But in terms of actual clock design and sophistication, much of it came from elsewhere. But we loved clocks because we're a business city, so time is money. So we tend to be hyper punctual. And the only reason I was 2 minutes late was I ran into a mate of mine, Andy Bathurst, just on the way in here, who wanted to chat to me. So it's that sort of connectivity. So let's go back to pubs and what makes them special. I think it's what makes an English pub special when it is special is that you can walk up and talk to anybody. If we went up and spoke to those two guys there, I'll bet they would answer us. And as you look at places around the world where that happens, that does happen in Italian coffee shops. That does happen in French coffee shops in the countryside, and I've been there. It even happens in China. In China, they have tea houses, cha guan, tea house. And they're famous, particularly the tea houses of Sichuan province, for being convivial places where people discuss intellectual literature and all kinds of things. And that goes back to at least the Tang dynasty in the 6th, 7th century. So all over the world, people want to get together. But the question is, can I go and talk to other people in the pub? And to do that, I need to know that I share their culture. So if you were in a fishing village and you walked up to somebody and it was really just fishermen, you wouldn't feel comfortable if you weren't a fisherman. Yeah, I don't really know about trawling and nets and the current price of diesel and what the regulator's doing on fish lengths. If you were going up in a country pub where it was really all farmers, you'd feel a bit artificial if you were not of that community. So you need to be part of the culture.
Yeah.
And when that culture works, if you look at the evolution of London pubs, it is intriguing. We have a tradition these days of going up to the bar, right? But it wasn't the case. 200 years ago, you didn't go up to the bar. You were served. And people forget that it was actually the gin palaces in the 1840s that changed that. They were just trying to get people to hoover up as much gin as they could. And so they started serving people at the bar to increase the amount of booze that was being dished out. So we've seen, of course, the rise of the gastropub. But just opposite here, we have, of course, the sad demise of Simpsons.
Yes.
Not Simpsons in the Strand, but Simpsons in the City, which was an institution from the 1700s, which shut down about 5 years ago, in a bit of a legal dispute that's going on between the landlord and the tenant, which is a shame because Simpsons was a community for all of us here in the city.
Yeah.
But why do I pick on Simpsons? Because you ate at Simpsons.
Yeah.
So it's not about the food. It's not about getting drunk. The distinction I've always made between the coffee house and the tea house is, well, one was about it was about a sedative, which is alcohol, and the other was about a stimulant, which is tea or coffee, depending on which way you go. So where do we come to?
Well, alas, Michael, we come to not so much the end, more of a way station on what's proving to be a fascinating journey with you and with the City of London. Fascinating talk. You must come back again so we can talk more about these flaneurs and the coffee houses and the secrets of the city. But for now, it's goodbye from me, Tim MacDonald.
And me, Jeff Brow.
And a huge thank you to you, sir, to our guest, Michael Mainelli. Thank you very much, sir.
Yes.
Indeed.
Thanks, Michael.
Cheers. Join us next time when we will be coming to you from the Cockpit Pub on St. Andrew's Hill near St. Paul's Cathedral. Our guest will be Claire Button, archivist, pub expert, and tour guide for Liquid History Tours. Now, I like the sound of that, Liquid History. Whatever can that be? Mine's a pint at the very least.